Everybody, welcome back to a word from our sponsor. My name is David Dietrich. Have a great deal for you this week. All holiday season, our sponsor is offering free delivery. That's right, not just delivery of your packages, free delivery for you from the kingdom of darkness to the kingdom of light. You should take advantage of it. It's a good deal. We're actually going to be in the book of John. So John 1, as we look at the passage, starting in verse 1:1, it says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." Now, as we go down in John, there's a very important passage. It's one that you might have heard, and it's John 1:14. It says, "And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And we have seen his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth." And this is this Christmas passage that's often overlooked, that the Word became flesh. And it's this concept of the incarnation. If we look at the incarnation as a concept or as a thought, what it means is, dictionary-wise, would say a person who embodies in the flesh a deity, a spirit, or abstract quality. So we use incarnation in this way of one thing indwelling another, and generally in a person who is being incarnated by something. Well, in Christian theology, the incarnation is not just that a body was possessed or became part of something else, but that the Word, which was eternal, actually became something else. So this wasn't God adding himself to a human. It was God becoming human in that sense. And this incarnation is more than just celebrating the arrival of a baby. There's so much more to that. I mean, when we think about the incarnation, Jesus, who was eternal, as we see in John 1:1, stepped into the time stream in a different way, right? Like the way that we experience life is different than the way that God experienced life. Like God was here before the beginning of time. God is eternal in that he's outside of time. And that's where Jesus was before creation. And yet he chose to subject himself to time. And not only did he subject himself to time, but he also subjected himself to being human, or to being powerless in a form of a child, to be dependent as he grew up. And this, the sicknesses, the physical things that go on in our body, the growing, the development, all of those things, that God subjected himself to those things. When we think about the incarnation, we not only think about how he subjected himself, but how he limited himself, that he didn't cease to become God. And this makes me think of the word meek, because a very good friend of mine, Victor Marx, he always says, meekness is not weakness. And this is something I hear a lot of pastors saying nowadays, and I think it's good, and it's good to remind us that meekness is power under control. Right? So when we are meek, as the Bible calls us to be, as men especially, but as Christians in general, it doesn't mean that we're harmless. It means that we are very dangerous, but we have it under control. That we have power because we have the authority of God behind us. We have the truth and the hope and the love and the grace and the mercy, the reconciliation, the ministry of reconciliation that God has given us in a way that a non-believer does not. In a way that has the power to change lives. And that is real power. And yet we need to have it under control. And we need to speak that truth in love. And when I look at God, who had all the power of the universe, but chose to limit himself and act in a human form so that the people that he created would be able to relate to him in a greater way. This is the perfect example of meekness. There's also one other thing here that I love about the incarnation. When we think about this, this was like in some ways, and not the first, but I think we're like the first missions trip, right? Like a missions trip of God coming to speak to a people, right? We can send letters, we can do these things, but this is actually coming in and being face to face with people and having a testimony of that. And when I think about that, it inspires me. It makes me want to imitate that. And when I think of the incarnation, I want to do two things. I want to acknowledge the great act of love that it was for Christ to partake in the incarnation, to participate in the incarnation. But I also want to take from it the purpose that Christ had in fulfilling and acting the incarnation out, like in taking that step. And that purpose was that we also might go and live a life of being incarnate, right? Being things to other people, like going to people and meeting them where they're at so that we might share the love of Christ with them. And, as we have Christmas coming up, as we look at the holidays and everything that we have, and even just the day itself and what we're going to be doing, we should take a moment and not just celebrate, that there's this arrival of God, but celebrate the continued process that arrival was part of and the result from that we are called to be a part of. How can we reach the communities that God has sent us to? Because God sent his only son, as we see in that same book in John 3:16, God sent his only son so that who shall ever believe in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. In the same way that God sent Jesus on a purpose, that Jesus accepted that, we also have been sent with a purpose. And that we also have become people to be able to be a witness to those around us, to be a witness to the world. And we see that in 2 Corinthians, actually, where it calls us to a ministry of reconciliation, which we'll talk about next week. But all of this to say, as you guys go into Christmas, think about how you can be a light to those around us, a light this is a great season where we hear Christmas carols on the radio, we hear, the gospel coming out all over the place, and let us take the opportunity to speak to people, to live life with people, and to draw them into the beautiful miracle of God becoming man and saving mankind through that sacrifice and that selfless act. It's a powerful thing, and we celebrate it every year. Don't miss it. Like, share, subscribe. Hope that you enjoyed the video. We're encouraged not only by what God has done for you, but what God has called you to do for others. Go and be that light, and we will see you next time.